Good morning, Revolution, everyone. Thanks for joining us this week. We're so pleased to be joined by Cameron, Kay, and Scott. Cameron lives in New Jersey, but is joining us from New York headquarters. We're afraid that this show is going to be a little bit New York centric, but that's because we have good news to share from New York City, where it seems as though Andrew Cuomo has been roundly rejected in the polls, and Zohran Mamdani, an assemblyman from Astoria, Queens, we love it, has been nominated as the Democratic primary winner for mayor, which is great. But we're going to talk about that today. It's not all roses. We're not out of the woods yet. But first of all, thank you so much for joining us. We're streaming live on Twitter, YouTube, Facebook, Twitch, and I think TikTok soon, if not today. But please be sure to like and subscribe and share the show so that we can get the word out there. And thanks again for joining us, to all the panelists. Hello, welcome.
Thank you.
So today we're going to start off with a really exciting lightning round. Now, real quick to just sort of set this whole thing up. This Tuesday was election day in New York City for the Democratic primary for mayor. Now, that's not the mayoral election, but it is who it is that the Democrats are going to be running for mayor. And to everyone's surprise, including the winner's surprise, Zohran Mamdani said that he expected to not know what the final results were until next week. We actually had a win with Zohran Mamdani taking 43% of the vote and Andrew Cuomo taking 36% of the vote. The next highest person who earned the vote was Brad Lander at about 11.5%. This was our second opportunity to engage in ranked choice voting in New York City, and we'll discuss a little bit on the show how that might have contributed to things. But first, I just want to go around and ask folks, how did this happen? What did the Mamdani campaign do right? I mean, Andrew Cuomo, as you might have read in People's World, had, $25 million worth of Super PAC money behind him from some of the most powerful interests in New York, even in the country, in addition to an extra $10 million in his own war chest. He vastly outspent everyone else and yet lost. So what happened, Scott? Why do you think that Mamdani came out on top this time?
Well, I think there are a couple of things. One is that, he had a message that resonated with the needs of the working class around affordable housing, around public transportation. I think his campaign also activated a lot of volunteers. They knocked a lot of doors. They really hit the ground and did the work. And also, I think there was just a lot of arrogance on Cuomo's part. This assumption that you could, trot out the usual tropes. Oh, he's too inexperienced. He's too anti-Zionist. He's too left. He's too whatever, and expect that people would respond to that. I don't think that's the situation necessarily anymore.
Thank you for your contribution, Scott. Kay, what do you think from Queens? What did they do right this time?
I think they reached out to people in the neighborhoods, and they had a strong campaign on affordability, laser focused. And in my neighborhood, where people have to, there aren't any people who own really, or rent, I should say, because people don't generally own, but rent apartments on their own because the average income is so low. I think that really resonated with people. My neighborhood was one of the ones that swung heavily in favor of Mamdani. And I know my door was knocked on like 4 times by these canvassers. And so I think they did the groundwork. They had a very good ground game, and they related to people on something that should reach across traditional party lines, which is the affordability of New York. Unless you're a millionaire, then it's tough in New York to live the life that you're kind of promised with the whole American dream. And so I think that really resonated with people.
Thank you, Kay. Now, Cameron, I would love to believe that, Zohran Mamdani says that he is a democratic socialist, and I would love to believe that all 400,000 and something people who voted for him are socialists, but I don't think that that's true. So what is it that you think made people reach across and sort of say, well, I don't really, I'm not a socialist, but I would vote for this guy? What is it that you think happened this time?
Well, again, like Scott and Kay was talking about, the main thing is putting forward a program that addresses the needs of working people. The obviously the whole anti-socialist and attack that ruling class forces use is to try to distract from the issues, and try to scare people away from their best interests. But I think that most people, or at least many people, are less interested in you know the labels, and more interested in what is in their immediate needs. And Mamdani's program addressed burning issues for working people. So I don't think that most people are. That if you can cut through the ruling class narratives and get to the heart of the issues, people are gonna not think too much about socialist, not socialist. They're gonna look at the issues and vote based on that.
Thanks. Yeah. And before we move on, I want to discuss a little bit with you guys the role of coalitional politics in this, right? Because nobody on the panel so far has mentioned that people really hate Andrew Cuomo, and that as much as Zohran Mamdani was out there getting his name in front of people, there was also sort of this grassroots movement from the progressives, many of whom were running for mayor, many of whom did not win, where they were saying, no matter what, don't rank Cuomo on your ballot. Andrew Cuomo has a very disgraced history in New York City and in New York State. He's a sex pest. He was harassing people that worked for him. He killed a lot of seniors during the COVID-19 pandemic. He was in a $5 million book deal scandal where he's using public funds to, promote himself. And he had to resign in disgrace, basically. And so I'm wondering what role coalitional politics might have played in this, because for ranked choice voting, the way that it works is that you have to, on election night. So it's still really confusing, right? This is part of why I feel like we need to work on ranked choice voting a little bit. It can be kind of confusing for people. If no candidate reaches 50% by the first count, which was on election night, then it goes to the second round of counting, where everybody's number 2 on their ballot gets counted towards either Andrew Cuomo or Zohran Mamdani, basically the first 2, right? And number 3 at 11.5% was Brad Lander. And Brad Lander and Zohran Mamdani had gone around together in the previous weeks. They had cross-endorsed each other. They had said, if you're going to rank me number 1, you better rank this other person number 2. And they had appeared more and more together out there around these issues of progressive, politics, but also around this necessity of not having Andrew Cuomo in office. And even the Working Families Party, for instance, which is I would say, nemesis of Andrew Cuomo, personal nemesis of Andrew Cuomo, who tried to destroy the Working Families Party in New York State. They came out with their own slate saying, vote for any of these people, do not vote for Cuomo. And so I'm wondering for the panel, does this signal sort of like a new age in coalitional politics? I know that there is a book out recently from international publishers by Joelle Fishman, who engaged in a lot of electoralism in Connecticut. And I found that the way that, Lander was doing things near the end there seemed very similar in this whole, like, attacking the right, not attacking the left, and trying to build unity or a united front to win. So I'm just wondering what you all think. What do you think, Scott?
Yeah, absolutely. The United Front is the label that I would kind of put on this thing. There was a very clear message that Cuomo would be a disaster, right? Don't rank him. And a lot of the organizations who were doing get out the vote work, who put out campaign or literature around the elections, had different rank lists that they were recommending. Our party, our clubs in New York City, took a slightly different approach. We didn't recommend any order of ranking. We don't endorse candidates, from outside of our party. But we did explain ranked choice voting, how it worked, and gave little blurbs about the different candidates and how they would, what their records showed. It's clear that Cuomo would be a disaster for many reasons. So there's a certain way in which ranked choice voting enabled people to coalesce around a victory that was possible at that precise moment, which was to defeat Andrew Cuomo and the huge quantity of billionaire money and APAC money and real estate developer money, that was pushing his candidacy.
Thanks, Scott. Kay, what do you think? How are coalitional politics playing a role now with ranked choice voting? Do you see this as something that maybe the party could interact with sometime?
For sure. I think it with these different voting systems, we're used to one at the national level where you just pick one person and you kind of pinch your nose and hope for the best. Ranked choice voting opens up the field a little bit where you can pick your favorite person for number one, and then like you were talking about, uh, if you don't hit a majority, which I'm not sure that Mamdani has hit a majority, then whoever ended up last on the list gets eliminated, and their second choice gets used and added to those totals. And so that at that level, that's when this coalitional work, these cross endorsements, start to do their work. And so I think the reason, because I was confused, kind of trying to think about how this worked, the reason that people are calling this a Mamdani win, even though he hasn't gotten a majority yet, is because of those cross endorsements. You had people who were voting for Lander first, but Mamdani second. And so, as the eliminations happen and they come up, I think we're going to expect to see a lot more Mamdani votes earlier that will get him across the majority than Cuomo votes. And again, the all but Cuomo really helps here because as you cross off those people at the bottom of the list, if Cuomo's not ranked, then he's not going to get any votes. And so that leaves room for us to say, as we are joining these campaigns and helping on the ground or running our own candidates, who can we build with? What alliances can we build to argue for and to push for a victory for working people as a whole? Because we don't have to jump straight to a communist candidate to get something better. The bar is quite low at the moment in a lot of areas, but we can make things better. And our party is already engaged in that work. And, if you don't already have ranked choice voting in your area, it is better than, just voting for one person and having to deal with it at that level. There's more space on the board, so to speak.
Right. On election night, when, Mamdani had 43% and Cuomo had 36%, you looked at Lander, who had said, everybody who votes for me, vote for Zohran Mamdani number 2. And you said, okay, well, I can't imagine that there were a lot of people in New York who voted Lander number 1 and then Cuomo number 2, And so if you were to take a portion of Lander's, a majority portion of Lander's votes and then give them over to Mamdani, that would have probably pushed him over that 50% mark, right? Now, Cuomo didn't really want to play this game. It was, bless her heart, Jessica Ramos, also from Queens, decided at the 11th hour that she was going to endorse Andrew Cuomo against her constituents' wishes, against every other progressive's wishes, against what she would have said 48 hours earlier, and decided to endorse Cuomo. And then Cuomo came out and accepted her endorsement and said, well, I'm not going to endorse her, though. When I vote, I'm the only person that I'm writing on my ballot. So it looked as though what Cuomo got on that first round, he wasn't going to pick up a whole lot after that. I think the fourth person who earned the most votes was Adrian Adams, who got about 4%. He might have squeezed out a little bit from there, maybe a little bit from Scott Stringer, but Cuomo wasn't looking at this as like an opportunity to build coalitions. So Cameron, you're in New Jersey and you have a completely different electoral landscape. You also just dealt with your own situation with Democratic primaries where the person that we were mostly hoping would win did not win. how do you think that coalitional politics or building coalitions or maybe even trying to implement ranked choice voting could help push progressive politics in a place like New Jersey? Because obviously New Jersey is not New York City, you know? Oh, you
Sorry.
muted.
Yeah, well, I do think that ranked choice voting could have helped us a lot in New Jersey in a few different ways. The winner in the primary, Mickey Sherrill, won with less than a third of the vote, last I checked. And there was progressive forces were split at least three ways between Ras Baraka, who was clearly the most progressive in the race, and Sean Spiller, who was a union leader and person, African American and immigrant with a good program, and Fulop, mayor of Jersey City, who presented himself as a progressive, but in reality is actually, fairly, I would say, almost on the right. Very pro real estate. He had $6 million from real estate behind him in prior campaigns. But he did present himself as a progressive, and for people who didn't know him, they were fooled by it. So the for and then on top of that, the big business media and some of the other candidates, including Cheryl and Fulop, put out messaging that was basically scaring voters into. It's a little ironic in Fulop's case because he was presenting himself as a progressive, but saying that basically, in so many words, that Ras Baraka was too progressive to win, and also maybe too black and too Newark. But there was a lot of messaging put out there from some of the candidates, as well as NBC and some other New Jersey newspapers, that basically Ras Baraka couldn't win. And so you should vote for the safer candidate or the safer progressive. But and a lot of people, I think that affected a lot of people. If we had ranked choice voting, it would have been harder for those kind of those forces to put out that messaging. So I think that definitely could help. I also want to say that ranked choice voting, I think, should also be something that's used in general elections, not just in the primaries. That would increase options for third-party candidates to be able to enter the races and put forward progressive platforms without being potentially splitting off, the anti-right coalition and giving a victory to the right. And I also want to think that at the same time, we can't think of electoral reforms by themselves as being a replacement for the unity that's needed to be built. But I think that organizational unity, political unity, and so forth. But I do think certainly it can would help a lot, and you saw that in this most recent election. In terms of well, I'll stop there.
No, thank you. And I appreciate you being able to plow through all of these bells and whistles going off in the background. Good composition. But I agree with you. This was part of the problem with the New York City situation, is that we have primaries in our we have ranked choice voting in our primaries, but we don't have it in the general election, which means that the general election is going to be a lot tighter. Now, some people are already saying, oh, it's great. Look, they're going to split. If Cuomo keeps running, which he might, because he's a narcissist and he's a psychopath. But if Cuomo keeps running, then maybe, they'll end up splitting the conservative vote four ways, whereas the progressives can sort of unite around one candidate or what have you. But, regardless, they're going to bring down the wrath of God on Zohran Mamdani, right? This is a 33-year-old self-proclaimed socialist, born in Africa. You know, it was funny because my husband last night was saying, "Oh my God, he's basically everything that they accused Obama of being," and that he's, you know, he just became a citizen in 2018. He's an immigrant, son of Queens. You know, he's going to have to deal with a lot. And there's, you know, developers and billionaires are already on phone calls and in conference rooms trying to figure out how it is that they're going to bring this guy down. He's got a lot to get through. You know, what is it that the Mamdani campaign needs to do better in order to win in November, do you think? Now, I know we're not endorsing Zohran Mamdani. We're the Communist Party, and we certainly wouldn't purport to, you know much about how the campaign has operated thus far. But I just want to know from your perspective as an outsider, as a communist, what could you say might help them secure a win that would be as resoundingly against, you know, these reactionary forces of either Eric Adams or Andrew Cuomo or, God help us, Curtis Sliwa in November, Scott? What do you think that they could do to strengthen that coalition that's building around him?
I was looking at the endorsements that Mamdani got versus the ones that Cuomo got this morning, and it seemed like Mamdani got some labor support, but in terms of the like big labor forces in New York City, more of them went for Cuomo. The same thing with black clergy. A lot of prominent black clergy members endorsed Cuomo, and those are not things that, you know, when we're thinking about building a progressive and anti-fascist, anti-right coalition, those are not things that we can endorse, ignore. So it's going to be really important to follow how labor moves, how the African American freedom movement moves around around the general election, and to really work at building the kind of coalition that will make it impossible for the right to take control in the city. And I had a question kind of as well. I'm not from New York City. I live upstate, and you know, I was wondering, given what we saw with Brad Lander being, you know, seized by ICE as he was engaged in immigrant defense work, you know, the increasing sort of the terror campaign waged by the Trump administration against migrants and refugees. Was there a sense in the city that there was a need for somebody who would actively stand up to that in a way that Eric Adams, for example, did not seem to be willing to do or capable of doing? Was that a factor in people's minds? That's it.
I
Thank
think
you.
I want to kick that to Kay, who is from the most immigrant, most diverse uh, urban area in the entire world, which is Queens, New York. What do you think, Kay? Do you think that Lander and Mamdani's and the progressives' strong stance against ICE, who have already been sniffing around in our neighborhoods, do you think that that had anything to do with this?
Yeah, definitely. I am frequently in a lot of spaces where I think if I showed up, there would be a serious issue. People would be up in arms. Um, y- you know, New York is not a good place to try to enforce the rules of the borders are, where they're rounding people up from the workplaces, from their homes. Uh, it just, yeah, it's not popular at all. And I think the fact that Mamdani, Lander um, were against that really helped their case. Because I think, you know, I've been thinking about how the vote splits, because, like Scott mentioned, the African American freedom movement, even across age, there is a split. The older Black folks, for example, tended to vote for Cuomo, while the younger voters tended to vote for Mamdani. And so I think there's a perception of Cuomo that is there. It's like, well, this person is familiar to us. We can deal with this. There's the perceived competence there, which I can't speak to myself, but the votes are there to look at. Uh, but when it comes down to people who have been like on the streets just in recent weeks and months, battling these outcomes of the Trump presidency, Mamdani and Lander have a much stronger record on that. Um, I, I haven't seen much from Cuomo. All the money that went into that campaign, none of it, none of the promotion made it to me. Uh, yeah.
We got a ton of promotion actually, but none of it seemed to be something that was like, oh, we stand with immigrants. Like, it didn't seem as though Cuomo was really selling anything except, I'm the former governor of New York State. Don't ask me how I lost my job. And that's about it. And this other guy, he's like a really scary Muslim socialist who was born in Africa. And that was about it, right? But Kay, I still want to kick the question back to you. Thank you for answering that for Scott. I agree. I think that actually immigration has a lot to do with this. I think that trying to be and we'll get to this question in a minute, but saying like, you want to be Islamophobic in New York City. Well, guess what? There are more Muslims who live in New York City and people who don't like Islamophobes than there are Islamophobes in New York City. So I don't think it's going to work out for you at the ballot box. But what is it that you think that Mamdani's campaign could do better in order to try and get around the wrath of God that's going to be coming down on Zohran Mamdani in the fall?
Yeah, I think especially since there's the socialist label that's floating around, support from labor unions, any sort of support that he can muster will multiply uh, forces on the ground. There was a really strong volunteer showing, and people are really looking at that and saying, "Oh, we need to replicate this all around the country." That grassroots force is what put him in the place that he is in now. And we really can't ignore that. Like, there's the face Mamdani, but then there's the movement behind it that is actually doing the work and that he is representing. And so I think when we're communists, we're coming to this as communists and thinking about the unity that needs to be forged. We need to, get the progressives and the labor unions on the same page and see where are the interests shared. I know there was some talk before the election day about who's plausible to win. People now claiming, oh, I just gave money to Cuomo because I thought he was going to win, and I just wanted to have an in because the guy is. I don't know if I can curse on this program, but he's difficult to work with, we'll say. And so, now they're weighing their options. These big money people are saying, oh, do I want to go with Cuomo or Adams? And the unions are like the other big force on the ground. I think the multiracial unity is in the process of being forged already. Really, what we need to see are the unions, and I think that would address some of the older crowd as well.
Thank you for that, Kay. Cameron, is Zohran Mamdani going to have to go hat in hand to the unions, or are the union bosses supposed to go hat in hand to Zohran Mamdani? That's what I would like to pitch to you. A bit of a spicy question.
Well, I mean, I would be surprised if the unions are not going to go to bat for the Democratic nominee. But especially, seeing the result and that there is so much support for Mamdani's campaign. And so, and I don't think that there's any opposition to the left program on the part of the unions, but, a lot of times there's a what enters the picture sometimes I think is a concern of what happens if, a particularly vindictive centrist wins the election and doesn't want to award certain or negotiate certain contracts with unions that didn't support them, for example. of course, and I would be surprised if Mamdani didn't, uh, work to strengthen his campaign's relationships with the organized labor movement. Obviously, if he didn't, that would be a mistake, but I don't see that happening. Um, I kind of want to go back to like an earlier question when you were talking about like the coalition work, and Kay was talking about the need for you know multiracial unity, and I think that's extremely important. There's been a historical problem within certain sections of the left and progressive forces, particularly white people in that movement, to not really see the centrality of the fight against racism, not really put in the kind of effort that's needed to fight the influence of racism within their own communities, which can show up in many different ways and subtle ways. I can't help but see, when I'm looking at the two campaigns, Rod Brockett campaign in New Jersey and Mamdani's campaign in New York, that I think a lot of progressive, liberal-minded, and even left folks, white folks, didn't see, weren't able to see the importance of the Rod Brockett campaign in the way that they probably should have been able to, and could have been put in a lot more effort to mobilize support for his campaign within their own communities, and so forth. So I think that that's a really important aspect. And I think it's fundamental to building unity is that white workers and white people generally fight against the influence of racism within their own communities and within themselves. And So I think that is something that will need to be addressed. I think that sort of enters the picture a little bit when you're talking about why certain sections of the communities of color are not immediately necessarily drawn to the candidate that's running on a explicitly kind of socialist platform. Is that historically, the socialist movement probably could have done a better job um, of seeing the importance of the fight against racism. Um, and Anyway, I think that as Kay mentioned, I think that we're going to see. I think that unity, that coalition that needs to be there is developing, and we just need to continue to fight for that.
Thanks, Cameron. So I want to take a thread from what you were just talking about and weave it into another question. But first, I want to check in with Scott and Kay. Did you have any comments on what Cameron just said? Go ahead, Kay.
Yeah, fight against racism is central. I just did a presentation for the party, um, joined by Tim Johnson from the African American Equality Commission, and we were talking on Juneteenth about this question exactly. Um, and on one of my slides, I had a Venn diagram that showed the United States working class as, a big circle, and the nationally oppressed, which is our scientific communist term for what is commonly called just racism. Um, and if you look at the the circle that is the nationally oppressed, it is almost completely within the US working class. And it's about half of the area of the US working class. So if you're going to campaign on a working class platform, like by default, you have to deal with the issue of racism, just like you have to deal with issues of sexism. Like it's of similar magnitude in terms of numbers. Um, you can imagine somebody saying that, oh, I'm going to pick up this 50-pound weight, but somehow I'm going to leave 25 pounds on the ground and not have to consider that. It doesn't make any sense. You're either going to pick up the weight or you're not. So in a similar sense, we have to deal with the issues of racism immediately, We have to deal with issues of sexism as well immediately, um, if we're talking about any sort of working class platform. And I think both of those play into the election in New Jersey, as well as the one that we're seeing here in New York. You know, a lot of people talking about they're scared because, you know, uh, he's a foreigner and he's Muslim, um, when that really has nothing to do with holding elected office and being pro people.
Right. We love foreigners in New York. It's a city that's built on foreigners, built by foreigners, but aren't foreigners because we're all New Yorkers. And thank you, Kay. No, I appreciate that. And it's interesting. I like that you bring up the sexism part too, obviously. But I think it's because they were also saying at the beginning that like Cuomo was leading among, you know, certain African American communities, but also among women, which is like hard to wrap your head around because you're like, oh my God, wait a minute. Like, but he's a sex pest. He's got 13 people who he's been, you know, prosecuting with New York taxpayer money for accusing him of being a sexual harasser on the job. So I appreciate that. But Scott, did you have anything that you wanted to follow up on from what Cameron and Kay were saying before we move to the next question?
Yeah, just real quick, you know, I'd say that the African American freedom movement and the labor movement both have a special role in the fight for democracy in the United States. And if we think of the African American freedom movement and the struggle against white supremacy, against segregation, the struggle for full and unconditional equality, that's been intertwined with the struggle to protect democracy since well before the Civil War. So the idea that you can build a progressive coalition, that you can defend and expand democracy without, you know, making every effort to not just bring in, but look to the leadership of the African American people's movement is, you know, it's ridiculous to think that you can have a movement for democracy without that. That's it.
it
Thanks.
it can't hurt, right? Like it never hurts to be anti-racist. It never hurts to be anti-sexist or anti-LGBTQ phobia. Like, you know, it never hurts when it comes to building unity. And so I agree with what the panelists are saying here. But I want to take a thread from what Cameron was just saying and weave it into one more question. When it comes to the fight against racism, when it comes to challenging racism in our own communities, as white people or as non-Muslim people, how did the role of Islamophobia and, you know, anti-Palestinian sentiment and Zionism, how did this play into the race? Because when I sat back and I looked at what the numbers were coming out, and you know, we're communists, we're Marxists, we need the data. The data is not solid yet, but from what the data we do have so far, which Kay was referring to earlier, we can say that between between Lander and Mamdani, it was 38% of the Jewish vote in New York City, right? Whereas Cuomo got 31% of the vote in New York City. So, and Cuomo made a huge part of his campaign around saying, oh, Zohran Mamdani, he's a nasty anti-Semite. You know, he wants to destroy all the Jews in Israel. And even Kristen Gillibrand is on the radio yesterday on the Brian Lear show saying that Zohran Mamdani supports, you know, global intifada, which means killing all of the Jews, etc. So what's the role that, you know, this kind of bigotry against Muslim people or bigotry against Palestinian people has played in this election? And how do you feel as though the New York City electorate has responded to that, Scott? Or even the coalition, you know?
I think there was a certain thought, a very lazy way of approaching this on Cuomo's part and the forces behind him, that you could just, you know, do basically what the Trump regime has been doing and trot out this, you know, very reductive and very manipulative accusation of anti-Semitism against anyone who is critical of Israel or supportive of the liberation of the Palestinian people, and it fell flat. And that isn't to say that it won't play a role. They're certainly going to double down on it. But you know, thinking back to what happened around Jamal Bowman's campaign, for example, it seems like kind of a corner has been turned hopefully, in the ability of the left to, um, bring in organizations like Jewish Voice for Peace and really organize around the idea that it's not anti-Semitic to oppose genocide, right? It's not anti-Semitic to criticize the Netanyahu government. So I think that more work will have to be done, but it seems like a very positive sign. And yeah, it was just laziness on Cuomo's part to think that you could win that way.
Right. No, he was lazy. And I would agree with you. Absolutely. Being against genocide, not anti Semitic. In fact, I would argue it's a Jewish value. But go ahead, Kay. What do you think the role of this kind of, stoking bigotry, this 9/11 leftover stuff, what has that played in the election? And how did you think it landed with New Yorkers?
I think, I'm reflecting here about the vote of the older folks and like crime waves of the past that they had to deal with and stuff like that. I'm thinking, okay, I can see why they would want to go with Cuomo, because he's talking about, well, we're not going to upend everything and we're going to keep the police on the streets and stuff like that. And there were a lot of those, older conservative commenters that were like, oh, we've forgotten 9/11. Um, I think that the more conservative side, or at least status quo side, thinking of Adams, Cuomo, Eric Adams specifically, they tried to rely on these stereotypes. I saw some images online that were edited to make Mamdani look like, the stereotypical kind of Muslim look, harkening back to those 9/11 type images. I don't think it worked that well. Um, I also think of New York City's demographics, where like about 10% of New Yorkers are Muslim. I think that's accurate. Um, it's to the point where, like, if you're walking through a crowd, if you're on the train, there's almost certainly someone on that train who is Muslim. So it's like it's hard to have a social network in this city and not know somebody uh, who is Muslim. And they're just like with all religions, there are strong humanist traditions in all of them. That are pro people, that are friendly. You know, a lot of the major religions, like I'm thinking Christianity, Islam, Judaism, are very friendly with one another. As far as I've seen, like individual people um, in my network and other people's networks interacting with each other. And so, like the reality of uh, interfaith solidarity, and just trying to get through life in what is really a scary time for the United States, is it really rendered a lot of that propaganda ineffective. Um, I'm not sure how far it will go. I can imagine, having been a canvasser for Nina Turner when she was running for Congress, having been canvassing for Jamal Bowman, that there are going to be some really ridiculous caricatures of them made for these ads that are, racist to their core. We have to talk to people and make sure that they understand that what they're seeing may not be true. It's so easy to pay people to make stuff up, to come up with fake data charts, to come up with fake images. And we just have to, help people be conscious of that and keep them in touch with what's really going on in the city.
Yes, absolutely. Cameron, what do you think about this Islamophobic, anti-Palestinian stuff and why it didn't seem to resonate?
Sorry, I was muted. Yeah, I think I mean, New York is a place where people are very used to meeting people of many different backgrounds, and that's a great strength. The so I think that's probably a reason why it didn't land, and it didn't land because again, if you know, the racism is and Islamophobia and chauvinism in general, it's a tool that they use to try to distract people away from their best interests. And people saw that Mamdani was putting forward a program that was in their best interests. And so that and that was also because of what we've spoken about in terms of the ground game, and also they had they were able to reach a lot of young people on social media and so forth. So I think that so they were able to cut through a lot of that stuff, and people could see what program was on offer. But it's something that we got to continue to fight against, particularly those of us who are white, those of us who are not Muslim, to speak to people in our own communities and address chauvinism wherever we see it and on whatever level we see it. It can also take subtle forms. And that's an essential part of the fight for unity, which is what we're going to need to win. What New Yorkers are going to need to win in the general, because it looks like Cuomo's going to be in the race. There's going to be a 3 or 4 way race, it seems like. So, and the right is going to be trying to also probably try to coalesce around a single candidate and split off the progressive and the anti-right vote. So, gotta keep fighting against those attacks.
Yeah, that's true, Cameron, and that's an excellent point, because the Republicans, people who voted for Donald Trump can vote for mayor in November, and there is going to be a concerted effort from Donald Trump to get those people to come out and vote against Zohran Mamdani. And I just want to say, one of the people, it doesn't hurt for Zohran Mamdani that one of the people who's been out there cheerleading as hard as he has been the highest elected Jewish New Yorker, Brad Lander. And I think that provided a lot of sort of diffusion, as well as acknowledgement that, New York City is the most Jewish city on the planet. And yeah, if I were Benjamin Netanyahu, I would not be sleeping very well lately for a number of reasons. But this reason in particular is because Jewish New Yorkers and New Yorkers in general are saying that, actually, we don't really like what it is that's going on in Gaza, in the Middle East, in Iran. We don't like what's going on in Israel. We don't like this apartheid system. And that even if people are not super enthusiastic about it, even if it's not all a bunch of JV peers or JFREG people, they don't care as much as they care about free buses and about rent freezes, right? And so I think that this is an excellent sign for the pro-Palestinian movement, and a really, really bad sign for the pro-Israel movement, that people are changing their thoughts about this, and that the most Jewish city on the planet has decided, the progressives among them, or the people who are a registered Democrat, who actually came out and voted in the primaries, came out and said, you know what, we're good with this guy. He thinks that, you shouldn't have an ethno-state in Israel. We don't have a problem with that. Palestinian self-determination, we don't have a problem with that. So I think it's a tremendous gain for New York, for Palestinian national liberation, and also for the Jewish people of the United States, that were like, yeah, this isn't a good look for the tribe anymore. So, but I do want to ask one more question before we wrap this up. It's going to be tough in November, really tough in November. I can remember the India Walton campaign that was in Buffalo, New York, where India Walton, who was another young Democratic Socialist of America member who basically primaried the sitting mayor, but then lost to him in a write-in campaign later on that year in the general. I can think of a few different instances, Jamal Bowman, for instance, well, although that's not the general election, but I can think that there are lots of dangers that are still in the path, that like I said, MAGA people can come out and vote for whoever it is that Donald Trump tells them to vote for in our general election. So what is different about this time? What is different about this time? Why should I dial back on my cynicism and my pessimism and my, sadness that still lingers around what happened last November? What is different now? What is it that could make it so that he has a fighting chance in November, Scott?
I think the movement is growing. People are standing up. We're seeing bigger and bigger protests, and growing not just in terms of the absolute number of people, but in terms of the ability to build coalitions. There is an increasing level of recognition that not only that we need to fight, but that we can fight and that we can win, and that expanding democracy, not just clinging to the status quo, is possible. And I think this victory is going to add to that momentum, and we should say congratulations to the people of New York City who saw through, or at least to the Democratic primary voters of New York City who saw through, that fog of billionaire-funded propaganda, and really look to who is going to be able to fight for the people of this city. There's no cause for cynicism right now. For fear, maybe, for anxiety, not for cynicism.
Thank you, Scott. Yeah, it's nice to feel good when you voted and you won. Kay, what do you think is different about this time? Why do we have a fighting chance in November?
I think the Mamdani campaign's message discipline has been iron. It has focused, super hard on affordability, and we think about political slogans and how they might not be connected to the actual policies that are being implemented. That connection has been, super tight with this campaign. People need help with transportation, free buses, super easy. Groceries are too expensive, city-run grocery stores to help experiment with how we lower the cost. Like those types of connections, I think, are what got the campaign this far. What it will need to do going forward is to maintain that discipline and anticipate some of the attacks, now that the battlefield, like you say, is broader. We're not dealing with the Democratic primary where Republicans can't vote. We're dealing with, everybody can vote for everybody. So those places where there are a lot of attacks being launched, like, what about public safety and policing, or I guess what about Israel-Palestine, though that didn't seem to really have the effect it did, say, on Bowman, who also had a strong record on economic justice and local issues, but kind of got T-boned by that issue of Israel and Palestine. I think we could see a win in November, and I think we have evidence that the campaign has been able to maintain the message discipline under pressure, as we've seen in the debates, in the social media presence, and in the thousands of volunteers going out and turning out the vote, as it has in a primary election, mind you, not even in a general election. There's going to be a lot more people voting in the general election. So I think the more forces we can muster to go out in the streets and kind of spread these solutions that are simple and connected, one hand in the other, with the socialist orientation that Mamdani has, and anti-Trump orientation that he has. I'm looking forward to a win in November.
Absolutely. And also just to go and try and throw myself in front of that T-boning of Bowman real quick, they've redistricted him, right? That was another piece of it too, is that, but you can't redistrict New York. New York is the 5 boroughs. So, hopefully that'll be a little better for us. Cameron, though, what do you think? What is different this time? What makes it possible for us to win, or makes it more possible for us to win in November?
Well, yeah, like Scott said, I think the growing movement on the ground against Trump and MAGA. The growing mobilization is very important. So that's we got to the extent that the Mamdani campaign can, like Kay said, can stay focused on the issues that are affecting people. Not compromise his position. As you said before, people are tired of war, and it's robbing our communities of resources. And build the widest possible coalition with organized labor, African American freedom movement, women, LGBTQ equality movement, and so forth. And keep the focus on the fight against the right and the dangers coming down from the Trump administration and what a real progressive government can do to protect people from those threats. It's all key.
Yeah, no, 100%. And I think that the thing that sank Andrew Cuomo the most in this primary was that it was about Andrew Cuomo, and he's not a very good guy. But it was all about me, 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 me. That's why he didn't want to make any coalitions. That's why he said, "Oh, I'm just voting for myself on the ballot." That's why it was all about I'm experienced as a governor, me, 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 entitlement, etc. But it's not really about Zohran Mamdani. I mean, it is Zohran Mamdani, but it's about this group of people who have come around him. And I think about what Kay was saying about 9/11. Lots of these people who voted for Zohran Mamdani weren't born yet on 9/11. Like, the world is changing, the voter base is changing. What it is that people want is changing. And I think that you can't avoid that. And I think that by trying to embrace that as a broad progressive movement, that we could hopefully, fight off Adams / Cuomo / Sliwa in the fall. So, but thank you all so much for joining us today. I really appreciate the panel, and appreciate everybody who commented and shared and did everything that they could on their end from social media. We would encourage you again to go ahead and like and subscribe our channel. Also share this with your friends so that we can have a broader conversation. And be sure to tune in next week. I think next week. I'm not 100% sure yet because I know that there is a holiday next week, but be sure to tune in. Otherwise, every Friday, 10:30 a.m. Eastern, for Good Morning Revolution. And until then, stay strong, stay safe, stay in the fight. Take care.